James was a quiet man. His whole life he'd sought peace, not violence. He'd worked toward establishing friendships rather than creating enemies. In his humble little village, it was easy to live his life. There was no conflict to be had, whether on the dirt roads or within his own four walls. The others didn't see it the same way. From the moment James had been born, they had deigned fit to call him weak. They refused to accept that he could perform any meaningful work within the village, or that he could stand up for himself. For the most part, James turned a blind eye to the insults. After all, why argue against that which was true? He was content to be called a weakling if it kept him away from trouble. It was when James had found a wife, however, that the voices grew louder. They whispered behind his back, spoke to his wife when he wasn't around, and threw dirt on his name. They called him a waste of a man, stating that it'd be better for his wife to find a new husband. James tried his best to ignore the vitriol and focus on keeping his wife happy. When it was discovered that his wife was pregnant, the village outcry grew to a peak. No longer did they bother to hide behind false smiles and kind tones. Now they spoke openly, complaining that a man such as James was unfit to be a parent. They confronted him, telling him he should do better by his wife and leave her be to find a better man. James took it all with a smile, but inwardly he seethed. It made no sense how a man who had lived his entire life, acting as a friend, would find himself ridiculed by those he had deemed closest to him. "Don't be upset," his wife tried to say. "They don't mean it." James couldn't believe the words, no matter how much he wished to. As he thought and thought, he realized there would be no idle way to stop their chatter. If he wished to come out on top and prove himself, he would have to become an active participant in his own life. It was on that fateful day that he was staring from the window of his home. His gaze trailed across the distant mountains and the plains that led up to them. They scoured the trees and took in every inch of the roads between houses. There was very little chance to make a name for himself within the village, however. That was when his eyes landed upon a smattering of black nestled at the base of one of the mountains. Distant as it may have been, he recognized it as a cave. Memories came to the forefront of his thoughts, reminding him of the gossip that had drifted through the town over the years. There was a dragon in that cave, one that had never been bested. Even the hardiest of warriors dared not to tread upon its territory. Surely, he thought, if I could defeat that dragon, they would have to stop calling me weak. So, without further ado, James took his father's equipment and headed for the cave, despite his wife's protests. The sword's edge had rusted and dulled over the years, and the leather armor was a tad too large to fit comfortably on James's shoulders, but it was better than the simple cloth he wore. The village, despite not caring for his complicity in life, called after him once it was clear where his path would lead. James cared not. After all, why would he listen to the very people who had once scorned him? The journey was quick. Before the sun had reached its peak, James had set foot in the mouth of the cave. He stood there, trembling in every limb, but recognizing it was too late to turn back. If he died here, he would never get to see his child, but he would at least die a warrior. He gulped and ventured inward. The air grew warmer the farther he went. Heavy snores echoed off the walls of the cavern. Every few moments, the shifting of coins as they clattered against one another. Darkness soon enough encroached upon him, preventing him from making out the path ahead. James kept a hand on the wall, shuffling along lest he lose his footing. Before long, a soft glow illuminated the stone. He steeled himself, gripping his sword tighter in an effort to still the quivering in his muscles, and headed forward. The dragon lay there atop a massive pile of gold coins and jewels, dozing away. Its tail flicked in response to some alien dream, its sides heaving with the occasional breath. Its blood-red scales seemed to emit the same glow as before, although its dim nature was magnified from the reflection of thousands of coins. It grumbled and shifted, but didn't wake. James stared. Although he could see the dragon was very much asleep, he knew it could wake at any moment and either char him alive or swallow him whole. Yet, he also knew this would be his only chance to slay the beast. All he had to do was tread carefully. He couldn't even do that. As transfixed as he'd been on the dragon, he hadn't paid attention to what lay underfoot. The dragon's hoard had seemed solid from a distance, but the moment James set his weight upon the pile, it slipped out from beneath him. With a loud clatter, he fell. The dragon's eyes shot open. James dropped into silence. He watched as the beast rose to its full height, slit pupils widening as they took in his presence. He saw the creature's sides billow outward, spotted wisps of smoke trailing into the dragon's nostrils. He shut his eyes and hoped for a quick death. "What are you doing down there?" James slivered his eyes open, not having expected the dragon to speak. Slowly, he lifted his head and peered into the dragon's eyes. Gone was the hostility, replaced instead by a sense of curiosity. "Are you talking to me?" The dragon leaned its head down. "Is there another human in my lair?" James stood up and backed off, raising the sword high. "I've come to slay you, foul beast." The dragon stared, turned its head as if contemplating, then roared with laughter. James was taken aback, yet once the astonishment passed, he grew incensed. Woe be it for a dragon to mock him as well. "What is your name, human?" "James." The dragon chuckled. "Very well, James. I accept your challenge." James was equally glad and frightened. "Challenge?" Before his very eyes, the dragon's form shimmered, and in a few seconds, it no longer stood as a dragon, but rather an older man with leather armor. The dragon clenched and opened his hands, twisted and stretched and cracked knuckles, and then formed a dull sword in his hands. "Come on, show me what you can do." James had never once fought with a sword, but his lack of confidence was covered up by an unhealthy dose of foolish bravery. He charged, sword held high above his head. The dragon gave a single swipe of his sword and managed to knock James's away. James stopped and raised his hand, prepared for death. Instead, the dragon lowered the point of his blade to the ground. "You'll have to do better than that." "I'm sorry?" The dragon used his sword to point where James's blade had fallen. "Retrieve it and come at me once more." James felt certain it was a trap, so he kept his eyes on the dragon as he backed toward his sword. The whole time, the dragon kept an amused smile on his face. Once James had his sword in hand once more, he approached the dragon. "You'll pay for underestimating me." "We'll see about that." James charged once more. The dragon made another swipe. James made sure to hold on tighter this time. The result was a sharp stinging sensation up his entire arm as the two blades impacted one another. The dragon forced his palm into James's chest, knocking him back a few paces, and gave one more swipe. Again, the sword flew from James's grip. When James made no move to retrieve it, the dragon said, "Go, I will wait." James didn't wait around this time. He scurried for his blade, scooped it up, and hoped to turn all his momentum toward the dragon. The dragon was prepared, bringing his own sword around with ease to block the attack. James remained more cautious, backing off upon the failed strike. He advanced again and again, trying to catch the dragon off guard, but nothing worked. Soon enough, his strength flagged, and his strikes no longer carried any energy in them. The dragon seized the opportunity and knocked James's blade aside one last time. "I yield," James panted out as he dropped to his knees. "Oh, you most certainly do." The dragon approached James, letting his sword vanish from his grasp. "But I must admit, it was quite fun having you around." The dragon took gentle hold of James's chin and lifted the man's gaze. "You are weak, I can tell that much." James pulled his eyes away from the dragon's, disappointed in himself. To receive pity from a dragon was unbelievable. "Come back tomorrow." James drew back. "What?" The dragon chuckled. "Come back tomorrow, and the next day, and the one after that. I will help you no longer be weak, if that is what you wish." James thought on the proposal for only a moment before bowing his head. "Thank you, dragon. I accept your offer."